Okay, welcome everybody. So happy to have you here on our last day of workshops as part of the Regenerative Communities Summit. I hope you all have been getting as much out of them as I have. They've been extremely rich, and this is one that I'm especially excited about, catalyzing local economic transformation with Morgan March and Tobin McKee from Cooperation Humboldt. Their work is really inspiring, and I'm hoping it'll be useful to you all. We'll start with some introductions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Morgan and Tobin. So Morgan is a cooperative developer with Cooperation Humboldt and works as a business advisor for the North Coast Small Business Development Center. He has a background and master's degrees in project management, theater, and education, and extensive experience with nonprofits, cooperatives, and other companies, as well as management of public programs. His most important identifiers are a father and a partner, a Swede by birth, an immigrant and recent American, as well as a teacher, nerd, social change, and environmental activist, and a general warrior of love. And as I just learned, a builder and a farmer as well.
Oh, all sorts of stuff.
Thank you, Morgan. And Tobin is a grant writer and program administrator at Cooperation Humboldt. Tobin is a founding member of Worker-Owned Humboldt, the Community Health Worker Collaborative, the Cooperative Cannabis Economy Group, and the Jardín Santuario Community Garden with Centro del Pueblo. Tobin is also the co-director at Middle Way Network, a project of the Inc. People Center for the Arts, fostering the development of free wellness education and services for underserved populations. And it's really been my pleasure getting to know Tobin over the last year or so as we've been working together on strategy as well as decolonization work. Tobin was one of the co-facilitators of our pilot social justice community of practice we ran last fall that some of you were part of. And it's also been wonderful getting to know Morgan preparing for today's session. So thank you so much, and I will turn it over to you.
Yes, hey everyone, and welcome. I'm also looking forward to today's session. First, I'd like to say that we are going to do a lot of stuff, and we're not going to have time to do a lot of the questions that are going to come up, because we want to try to give you a wide array of what we're doing. So what we want you to do is write down all questions that come up for you. And if we haven't answered them by the end of today's session, we're going to give you our emails. So email us, and we will happily answer in email or do some sort of potentially consult your group or whatever you might have. But contact us afterwards. If we have time in the end, we will answer questions too. We'll see how things go. But keep your questions for the future. So I'm going to first just frame what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I'm going to do that with a little story. Forward, looking into the future, 10, 15, 20 years, we're looking at an energy descent. We're going to have less energy. And what does that look like? Well, it looks like localization. In one way or another, if you have less energy, you can transport stuff all over the world. This stuff you all know as transition people, right? But what does localization actually look like when you do the peak oil thing? When you try to build resilience in your local economy? And in our case, if it's post-capitalist. So we are seeing three different possible futures. It's the local liberal democracy, kind of a small version of the world we have right now. It is local fascism or neo-feudalism, where there's some strong people who are running local things and everyone else is kind of serving them. And then the last one is the local solidarity economy, where people are banding together to help each other out in one way or another. where they are cooperating. And for us, the most likely, if we don't do anything, is not a local liberal democracy. It is a local fascism or neo-feudal world. It's warlords running our world. If we look at what is necessary for a liberal democracy, in reality, you need a strong state to protect your liberal rights, to your ownership rights, and so on. So that for us is not a very likely future, nor necessarily desirable, because we believe that people working together is better and gives us the strength together to oppose things like fascism being on the rise, when we are looking at less resources for each one of us, when we're not anymore looking at an abundance of energy and technology that can all help us out. So for us, we are really looking at local fascism or neo-feudalism or a local solidarity cooperative ecosystem. And those are our two real options. And we need to work towards one of those. We choose solidarity economy. Tobin?
Thanks, Morgan. So what we're going to do is that we're going to put up a poll here for y'all to see. It's a question, and you get to answer it by going to a website. Here it is for you to see. You go to menti.com, and I'm going to pop that in the chat as well. Right now on your computer, if you have access to it, go to menti.com, and it's going to give you a space to put in the code 36446390. And right now in that site, share with us how you feel about those three possible futures in one word or whatever it gives you the space to do. And hopefully, if all works, it says voting is closed. So hold on, let me fix it. Now, does it say voting is closed? Do it in the chat, friends. Our technology has failed. Well, wait, no, there it goes. It worked. So here you go. This is what people are sharing as we see it coming forward. Thank you, technology.
And you are welcome to add more than once if you have many things that are floating around in your head.
We're just going to give that a few minutes to run through. And while we do, if anybody wants to type a thought or a question in the chat, we may have the opportunity, just while we give folks space to share their thoughts on the screen, we may have the opportunity to just open up a brief little dialogue with anybody who wants to pop something. Great. Hi, Shay. Yes, pressure. You feel pressure. Yes, I agree.
What's the passcode?
The passcode is 36446390, and it's right at the top of the screen and in the chat. I find it interesting when we're doing these word flows, when the larger words start to come together. And, right now, I love hopeful in the middle. I'm glad folks feel hopeful.
And resolved. I like that too. Although, of course, we're all apprehensive and too, so. Got a good crew, yeah.
Ah. We'll give this a few more minutes, and then we're gonna move on to the next thing here. I'm wondering if I think if I change screens, then folks see my change. Is that right? Or does it turn off sharing?
If you,
We'll see. I just want to go to my notes if I can.
I think the word cloud is up on the shared screen right now for you, Cooperation Humboldt, which I
Okay.
gather is David Cobb.
So the next thing that we are going to talk about, and I'll just leave this up for a little while and I'm going to hop in and bring us on to the next thing, is about system change. First, looking at our current system. And I just want to paint a picture of a very simple thing. And that is that our current system, we extract resources from the earth and we process those resources into commodities. And we sell those commodities on the marketplace. And most of what we use and consume comes from somewhere else. And it's moved through space by various means, all requiring petrochemical energy, and it gets to us and we use it. And that's the basis of our material economy. We live up here in Humboldt County, and we have this situation where we have the Highway 101 running north and south, and we have Highway 299 running east. And those are our ways in. You can get in by boat, but not very much happens there. Although all of our fuel comes in by boat. So a couple of years ago, storms closed all 3 highways. And the result was a rush on the grocery stores, which I think y'all experienced probably during COVID and maybe during the rolling brownouts more recently, if you're in California. We got to see the shelves of the grocery stores go down. And it just took 1, 2, 3 highways to do it. And that little thought experiment carries me forward when I think about what a local bioregional supply chain really is. If we cut off our supply chain in that way, what does our local economy really look like? And when we talk about catalyzing local economic transformational change, we're talking about creating a system where we could, in fact, close off those supply chains and take care of ourselves right there, right here, wherever it is that we live. And in order to do that, we talk about building a cooperative ecosystem. And so I'm going to give us just a second. I am so grateful to everyone for putting hopeful at the forefront. Look at the other words and appreciate them. We are going to talk about indigenous and solidarity wishful. I like this one. And our apprehension. We're going to talk about all of these things. So thank you for your contribution. This really shows us what the group is about. And I'm going to pass it over to Morgan here to put up another slide.
Yeah, we speak about a cooperative ecosystem. A cooperative ecosystem for us is not necessarily just co-ops, but that is the centerpiece of the cooperative ecosystem is the cooperatives. And we'll go into why we use co-ops in a little bit. But the whole ecosystem really is about building those interconnected supply lines, that supply chains. So you have both the consumer side and the producer side and the retail side in between is all connected together and can do that locally in a democratic fashion, where we support each other. So, and I mean, I can talk about a cooperative ecosystem for hours. And both Tobin and David, who's also joined us here, who's one of my other colleagues, have heard me do that already too. So, but to really look at what that means, we want to show you how we engage this. And to do that, I want to look at our, what we call our program heart. And what we mean with that is basically it's a map of our programs and project area that coincidentally happen to become a heart when we put them together. So this is our roadmap to our cooperative ecosystem. So as you can see, we have these program areas, these 7 areas where we are working on, because we consider those human rights. We consider arts and culture a human right. We consider housing a human right. Everybody have a human right to care and wellness in their lives, and economic democracy, being able to influence their own lives on an economic side, and food, human rights, education, a human right, and a disaster, when we say disaster response and community resilience, is really safety, being able to feel safe in your life. That is also a human right. So these things we put together is also like where we feel like we can engage to create this greater ecosystem of cooperatives and organizations that all cooperate together to supply this resilient, self-sustaining, and ecologically sustaining over time economic system in our local area. Do you want to add anything to this, Tobin?
Sure. We're going to go into this a little bit more, but as you can see, then we have all these projects that are branching out from the center of that heart, from the center of those program areas. And those are, as Morgan said, simply things that the people who have come forward to contribute to our organization have created in order to express these values. It's really a matter of who steps forward and who puts their time and their energy into doing these things. This is what has happened to emerge. And we're going to move forward to talk about a few of these and not all of them as examples. We will bring in many of them, but right now what we're going to do, Morgan, if it's all right with you, it seems like we can move forward to talking about cooperatives. Does that
Yes.
sound? So the place where we're going to focus and use as our grounding point during this presentation and discussion is cooperatives in a wide variety of forms. Since we're here to talk about economic transformation, cooperatives are one of the most powerful vehicles for facilitating economic transformation, partly because they interface flawlessly with the existing framework. And that's an interesting aspect of the general transformational philosophy is to step into and occupy and work with what we have now and the space that we have now. And we have right now is a capitalist system of independent businesses that work to earn money for their employees, and that's how we make our livelihood. And cooperatives, in one way or another, facilitate that in a transformational way. So it's a perfect interface between the current system and the emerging system. In terms of, let's just use businesses as an example, your usual model of business with an owner, be that a sole proprietor or a corporate ownership, the workers in that business do their jobs and they create value for that business sells that value, and the workers are paid a certain amount, but always less than the value of the product that they create. And the owners then extract that additional value as their own. That inherently extractive system is really the basis of wage slavery, of poverty, of economic exploitation, of the constant search to reduce the amount that we pay workers and reduce the value of the natural resources in order to decrease that business's bottom line and increase its profits. in a worker-owned cooperative or any form of cooperative that you look at, what you're going to see is that any value that is created is shared equitably. That's the simplest way to put it. It is a model which shares equitably the value that's created. And whether or not we're looking at a business that's earning a profit and then distributing that profit equitably to the owning employees, or if we're looking at a housing co-op where the value of the property and the responsibilities of ownership are distributed among the people who live there, or we're looking at a farming co-op or any kind of producers co-op where folks who make things are getting together and consolidating their shared power in order to be a stronger force in the marketplace, and then thus equitably distribute the reward of that increased power. All of the forms of cooperatives change the model from extractive to regenerative and shift the focus away from individual wealth building and to community wealth building. The same amount of wealth is moving, or more wealth is moving through the system. It's just distributed equitably, and that balance, we look to other ways of distributing wealth equitably through taxation, for example. Either if we had an ideal taxation system, it would help to distribute the wealth equitably. Worker-owned cooperatives are simply a more efficient model for doing that. Morgan, do you want to add anything to that? Why cooperatives?
Yeah, cooperatives are also much more resilient. I mean, one, with trained cooperation, which we think is a good thing in itself, to just like learn how to cooperate and how to work with other people, which is something we don't learn generally in the culture, in the Western culture. So that's a good basis for why we want to do it. But they also are much more resilient, like on a strictly market economy basis. When there's a downturn, there's many more jobs retained in cooperatives, many more cooperatives that survive than other kinds of businesses. And generally speaking, their profits go down less during a recession downturn, partly because if I'm the owner, I can say, okay, I'll take step down, everybody steps down 10%, so we don't have to fire anyone. Because the 10 of us can all work 90%, and instead of firing Bob, who is the 10th person, So that way that's one reason why people do that. Another one is this whole cooperative ecosystem thing that is happening already, where there is a lot of cooperatives, where one cooperative who is a consumer co-op, for instance, preferentially still work with a cooperative farmer, even if they had a bad year with their potatoes, and might like give them a higher price per potato because they didn't get as many potatoes. It's so that next year they can get a better price and have a cooperative there still locally, have a local potato farmer, rather than like get the cheaper potatoes from some out-of-state company that transport them to. So that's like building that ecosystem, that you have an inherent like cooperation between co-ops, and that is another reason why they're more resilient for economic downturn, which is obviously the first part of the downturn of all of society, whether that is energy downturn or if it is catastrophes that has natural background with climate change or whatever. All those is going to have that economic impact, and so that's how we can do that. David have also just posted in our cooperator David Cobb. He also posted a link in your chat to the Democracy at Work Institute, which have gathered a lot of the research showing what I'm just saying to actually be true and not just what I think. So.
I want to add one thing before we move on, Morgan, and that is when we talk about building a cooperative ecosystem, you all are here today because you're interested in catalyzing local economic transformational change. And what we are urging you to do is to take the information that we share here and consider it very deeply as to whether or not you want to see this happen in your local community. We are incubating small and medium-sized worker cooperatives right now in Humboldt County. And it matters to us to some extent what businesses we incubate. Obviously, we're not going to incubate a business that is unethical or extractive. However, any small business created by individuals who are wanting to transform the way that they're working that comes into our program, we offer them support because we start with where we are and we build these businesses one at a time. You know, we literally need to get started now, and maybe we feel urgency, maybe we feel like we're behind schedule, but this is what we can do. And so when we talk about co-ops, we're talking to you about consider the possibility of creating and setting up systems for the development of co-ops.
And as a tag on to that, we don't think there's two paths here. It's the dual power path, is where we are creating this alternative economic system within the big system and gradually taking it over because it's a better option for people and people are going to want to join it. So that's one path. The other path is we're building an infrastructure and a capacity. So once in 10 years, when we're starting to see the real decline in growth, according to research, the end of growth and so on, when we're starting to see that decline in 10 years, we have enough of a capacity and infrastructure built locally so that we can expand that quick when the other stuff don't work anymore. So that we are there to be that place where people go. So it's a dual, like it's the same work we're doing, it's just a dual strategy, both for both situations, whether we get that downturn or not. We are seeing this as a long-term and a short-term possibility to do this work. Just to address that, like fascism versus solidarity economy dichotomy.
Good. Well, I think we're probably ready to talk about Indigenous-Humboldt.
Yeah. So one of the ways that we have been doing this work is in close relationship with tribes, local tribes, and particularly the Wiyot tribe, which is the tribes, the ancestral area of that tribe is where most of the people in Humboldt County live, because it's the metropolitan area around the Wigi or Humboldt Bay, as it says on most maps, and that area, cooperation, that partnership with the Wiyot tribe has gotten it's developing into a local land trust, an indigenous community land trust that is controlled mainly, a majority controlled by the Wiyot tribe. And it's called Indigenous-Humboldt, which means love Humboldt in the Wiyot language. And the idea with why we're doing that, why we have this land trust, is so that we can repatriate their land back to them. So we bit by bit buying up property and repatriating it to them. And that way we put front and center the people who live locally in here, whose ancestors lived locally here before your ancestors came to this place, before I moved here from a different country. And we're trying to give more land to them. And at the same time, they are also interested in developing this relationship to the land and the relationship to each other. So that you can be in right relationship. That's what we call re-indigenization, to be in right relationship with the land and with the people, and to be of this land, to be in connection with this place. A lot of us come from somewhere else or had ancestors who came from somewhere else and now don't have a place that we are belonging to. And so this work is partly developing that relationship. And what we do, how we do that is by putting it into the commons. And what we mean with commons is this land trust idea, for instance, where the land is owned underneath by the WIA, but on top you can lease from them for a cooperative housing or for a business. And part of this this fund that we're creating is what we call colloquially the Indigenous Repatriation Fund, or the WIAT Repatriation Fund. It has a longer name that I never remember, and it means money that makes us well. That's the name in WIAT for the fund. And this is a way for us to funnel resources towards this way of creating commons-based solutions, cooperatives, housing cooperatives, business cooperatives. It's all focusing on the people who was on this land from before. So we have a. Do you want to share that link, Tobin?
Sure.
Thank you,
have
David. Gouds lak what he weke. Money that makes us good. See, I don't really speak the WIAT language. I don't even remember the name for the WIAT language right now. But we are working close with them, and we're trying to have them be leading the way where it's appropriate. And David is actually the one that works mostly with the WIAT on this particular idea. But
I'll just pipe in here, Morgan, to talk a bit about why working with local tribes is important. I know a lot of y'all out there are working with local tribes, so you already know why it's important. But in particular, some things that come to mind are first, centering Indigenous leadership, a model that clearly puts whatever power and capacity of our organization toward that which is most important to the tribe. So there's a difference between, hey, we have this program that we created and we want you to participate in it, to lend your energy to it, versus how can our organization, with whatever capacity it has, with whatever power of privilege or resources that we have, how can we put those toward your work and your leadership? And the vision of the WIAT tribe is one of repatriation of the land, but it is also, and I just love it when Michelle talks about this, it is the fact that obviously the tribal people everywhere on this earth are suffering from widespread multi-generational trauma and the current trauma of the profound economic injustice that our system has created. And at the same time, as guests on their land, folks like me who didn't participate in the genocide and the exploitation feel, Michelle just says, yucky, feel yucky about it. And there's healing, there's multi-generational trauma in that. And what Michelle says is that when we roll up our sleeves and we go to work together, and she's talking about that in a very literal sense, as in physically rolling up your sleeves and physically going to work together, there's healing that happens for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people who share the same space. And hope with its sleeves rolled up, said Marissa. Thank you, Marissa, in the chat. So Indigenous place-based healing is part of the WIAT tribe's vision for economic transformation. And that really creates, or we work together to create and share this space, because we are sharing this space and we are building buildings and we are having an impact on our space. And obviously, the values that have emerged from the sustainability and regeneration movements are beautiful. And the tribal peoples of this earth have a huge basis of knowledge and experience in living regeneratively. And so those two can come together and really support each other. So I wanted to share that aspect of healing and growth in collaboration. Morgan?
Yeah. And I'm going to address the question that we got in here, even if I said we wouldn't, because it's relevant to what Tobin just said. It is a cooperation. The land trust have a majority on the board designated by the WIAT. Cooperation Humboldt has one vote on the board. We have other people who are part of this, that like our local grant nonprofits that operates a lot of our grants and stuff locally, and other donors and so on. They have one part on the board and so on. So it's like we have there is other people who are involved in how decisions are made. It's not just local people. So I also think there's a sense of this being that those local, when okay, I'm going to start over. This is what I want to say. We want, when you're donating land or buying through the land trust, we want the WIA to be able to say what kind of projects do they want to okay on their ancestral land, which means they have a majority vote to say whether it's okay for you to build a factory on that piece of land, or a housing on that piece of land, or if it should be a regenerative farm, or whatever it is. They can say yes or no to the projects that get money through the fund, and who ends up building things on the land trusts owned land. So that's kind of why we are seeing it as their land. It doesn't mean that we at all of a sudden is the landowner for everybody, and everybody now have to follow what they say and nobody gets to do anything. They are still in that commons. It's just that if they want this particular part of the fund money, then the WIAT have a say in how their repatriation money is spent. We can open up for a couple of questions. We're a little bit ahead of time, so if there's any other questions on what we've just said, we can answer them now. You can either write in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask.
Okay. Not seeing any questions. So what we'd like to do is give you another opportunity to share your thoughts and ideas. And just take a few minutes in breakout groups. We're going to divide just into two, with Morgan in one and myself in the other. And John, I saw that question there. We will talk about that.
Well, that's a question. That's a question of what we call a conversion. And there is we have partners who do that on a national scale called Project Equity. And if you're not in our local area, look them up and they can help you do that. There is basically what you do is you create a new company and you buy, that is owned by the workers, and you buy the existing company from the person who is retiring or wanting to make it into a co-op and be a co-op member or whatever. So that's the quick one. And we don't work directly with DAWI, but we use a lot of DAWI's Democracy at Work Institute, but we use a lot of their materials. We do work with the US Federation for Worker Co-ops though directly, which I think is the entity that is behind the DAWI. Am I right there, Tobin?
It's a nonprofit branch of DAWI. Yep.
Yeah.
And as David put in, we also work with Project Equity. There's a link there. Project Equity specializes in helping businesses convert to worker ownership. So if you are thinking about converting a business to worker ownership, they are fantastic project partners that can really facilitate a smooth transition.
And David also answered Francisca's how we started, that we get started as a small study group. That's how we started. We had a study group, actually way before I joined. They had a study group where they discussed the interlocking oppressions and problems of capitalism, heteropatriarchy, settler colonialism, and see if I can remember all four here. What's the fourth one? Settler colonialism.
White supremacy.
White supremacy, right? That one that you're always blind to yourself, right? And how those intersect, and how we can have different options for how to live a solidarity economy as opposed to these things. So that's how we started. Yeah, that's what I thought too. That
I got it backwards.
Yeah.
Okay, so folks, we're gonna plop over into breakout groups just to make the group a little smaller. You can pick or automatically assign you to a group. Morgan, if it automatically assigns us to the same group, we'll switch.
Yeah. So I'm just going to answer real quick. I will include some reading lists for you in a follow-up email that we send out to everybody for the study groups.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and during this breakout group, we can talk about the question, what have you done that has been successful in forming partnerships with Indigenous communities, and what roadblocks have you faced? We can also use the time to talk about whatever questions and thoughts are on your mind. I'm going to pop that question in the chat, and we are going to go into our rooms. Here we go. And Morgan, it looks like you're assigned to room number 1. You're already there. So I'm going to join room number 2. And the rest of you, we'll see you there. The tyranny of time. I hope that was valuable for y'all as it was for us. We are going to capture some of what we learned here and make resources available for follow-up. Morgan, you want to talk about, I guess it's me. So
I can talk about it if you don't want to.
It's on the list. I'm supposed to talk. So in that program Heart, if you can remember, there were different program areas, and one of those program areas is education as a human right. And we like to think about, of course, when we talk about education, we're thinking about school for the most part. That's the word that comes to mind when we talk about education. So yes, Morgan has put it up here. We were talking about economic democracy. And now we're over here and we're going to talk about education, and in particular, some things having to do with study groups, but also broader, and the ways that education really brings empowerment and autonomy. And I want to frame this in the context of, if we're talking about building local economic transformation and transformational change. If we as an organization or as a movement or a group, whoever you are, attempts to center yourself, attempts to take on all the work, it's just going to be too much work. And this is a place, education is a place, especially if you're thinking about education as empowerment toward autonomy. This is a place that can really create a great deal of strength in your region, without concentrating on strength in your organization, although it absolutely has that effect as well. And so I'm going to give a couple of examples. Morgan and I are going to give a couple of examples of what it looks like when we use education to build empowerment and autonomy. And the first of those is our community health worker collaborative. And what that is we reached out to a lot of organizations, about 15 organizations, including the area's largest healthcare provider. And we literally just said, what can a nonprofit organization do to fill in gaps in the services that you're providing? And through a series of dialogues with that health center, they said, we need community health workers. And so I just want to highlight that that's an example of what can we do for you, not how can you participate and enrich our project. Once Open Door gave us that idea, we reached out to a lot of other organizations who we thought might want to have community health workers come into and benefit their communities. The result of that, I'll give two examples because they're the strongest ones, has been the development of the new Rising Hmong Association and the development of Comunidad Unidad del Norte de Arqueta. The new Rising Hmong Association is a group of 4 Hmong women who learned from us about what a community health worker is. And my favorite quote is, I work at Walmart all day, and when I come home, I write down my nonprofit ideas for how I can serve and benefit my community, and then I throw them in the trash. And this is the first time that I'm not going to do that. Now, really, what we're doing, what we have done, and what we're doing for the New Rising Hmong Association is very small. We basically said, hey, community health workers are a thing. Do you want to be one? And they said, yes. And we said, well, we're really good at having Zoom meetings. We'll show you how. And then we did. And we sit with them and we have Zoom meetings, and they come up with the ideas and they do the work. And we use our presence, our organizational presence, to help them apply for and get grants. I'm proud to say that they have received all 3 grants that they applied for, because there's a recognition of, oh, this is good, this is beautiful. Their goal is to become an independent nonprofit organization. The last grant that they got was a grant to fund their separation from Cooperation Humboldt as an independent entity. And Comunidad Unidad del Norte de Arqueta is a similar situation, where a group of Latinx residents in the most highly concentrated Latinx neighborhood in Arqueta was already coming together in a group to support their children. And when the Community Health Worker Collaborative approached them and said, hey, are you interested in this? They said yes. They took that and ran with that, and just recently landed a grant from the city of Arqueta to implement the city of Arqueta's goals for the improvement and regeneration of the Valley West area, which has been on their agenda for more than 10 years. And that group is remaining as a project of Cooperation Humboldt right now, but it is really, truly education, empowerment, and support more than anything else. And I'm just going to pass it off to Morgan to talk about another one.
Yeah, we'll just go through a few ones quick here. And write those questions down that you're writing so we can do them in the end. So it's easier for us to remember them. And we'll ask you again then. We also have a disaster response through community resilience project area. And that project area, it really works with disaster response, but also community resilience, building that, which all of our areas are, granted, but it works specifically with things like resilience hubs, for instance, or community assessments or neighborhood assessments that it can develop towards a community assemblies that can have both political and economic impact locally, where the assessment is to see who is where and what will happen if there's a catastrophe, who can support whom, and so on. But the resilience hubs is another area where we are like developing, for instance, with the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, our local Humboldt chapter. They are working with us, similarly developing what it means to be a resilience hub. What skills do they need? How can they meet and live into their values better, so that their meeting and organizational structures actually reflect their values better than the traditional ones they've been using, and so on. So that's a really huge part of our educational work that is outside of our education bubble, that or education circle, the education work we do that is specifically about study groups and so on. But so a lot of this whole thing really goes bit by bit by bit. We're educating people to cooperate, to learn to work together. And building a resilience hub in this case would be things like, this is where you can go if there is a wildfire, if there is an earthquake, if there is any of these things that happen, you should be able to go to your local resilience hub and maybe charge your phone because they have an autonomous system for electricity. Maybe they have a extra stored food or material, or they organize volunteers locally into this one locale, so that you can know that people in different communities have different neighborhoods, whatever it is, have a place that they know they can go to when there is something big happening like this, where we can then land, say, our disaster response work with volunteers, so you can focus, like, here's where we can get the food distributed to people. This is a place where volunteers can come and help out and set up camps for fire refugees, or whatever those are, which also happens to then be the next step of, say, our consumer co-op side of our cooperative ecosystem, because we're trying to build that group, that place into a place where that community can come to get what they need, whether that is in a disaster or if it is in a new economy.
Thanks, Morgan. I am seeing a couple of things in the chat that I want to respond to. First, Pat put up this comment about an inverse challenge or different form of the challenges in area, and with many organizations already existing, created by particular communities and working for solidarity among them. Yes, Pat, and part of that education piece and demonstration piece is what cooperation really looks like. So that's built into the DNA of the organization from the beginning. And I have a couple of examples before I talk about our worker-owned academy. And that is with the New Rising Hmong Association, we have two things happening there. One is that one of our partners up in the Hoopa Valley Indian Reservation actually started an organization called Native American Pathways that was so similar to what the New Rising Hmong Association wants to become, that we hired the director of Native American Pathways as the advisor to the New Rising Hmong Association. So we used our grant funding to bring an Indigenous community advisor in as their primary advisor, rather than us, because she had already done the thing that they wanted to do. And so there is cooperation among these two organizations now built into the DNA. The other example is actually similar with New Rising. There were fires up here, as you might know, and they were burning in heavily Hmong populated areas. And the American Red Cross was having an incredible difficulty contacting the Hmong residents in these areas that were on fire to bring them relief and supplies. And the reason was that somebody had just shot, a police officer had just shot a Hmong resident up there. And so the Hmong were not willing to have conversation with anybody at all who represented any institution, but they were willing to have a conversation with us and we became the liaison between the Hmong community and the American Red Cross to bring those supplies into those families who are in need. So cooperation or bridging and communication between disparate groups. And this also brings to mind this question: how many active? People always ask this: how many active members do you have that you can possibly do all this work? And that's what we're trying to describe here about education, empowerment, and autonomy. And when we get into the sociocratic structure, there is a notion that you're going to have to control all of this, and you're going to have to manage all of this and do all of this. And that's when we flip that system, then we can see that autonomy literally means autonomy, and we come in and as needed to support the emergence of these independent groups. Likewise, with our worker-owned academy, it's primarily an education program where we are teaching people how to build worker-owned cooperatives. And I noticed in the chat that there are folks engaged in similar programs on the East Coast. That is absolutely fantastic. There are quite a few cooperative developers out there. And doing cooperative development and building cooperative development programs is something that needs to happen in every local economy. So if you haven't already considered that as an option, I'm just going to say it again: consider that as an option, and we will do our very best to help you do that. And Morgan, you want to talk about study groups and how that ties everything together?
Sure. You feel like you're done with Worker Own Academy and Incubator?
Unless you should say
No,
more.
it's good. No, it's good. That's what we do. We work with the SBDC, the Small Business Development Center, and we get paid by tax dollars from the SBDC to do the work where we are helping people create their co-ops. And that is one way where we are funneling money into this work. This is one way we do it. I mean, we have grants and all that stuff too. But this is one way we can fund all of us doing this work. Like David just put in how many full-time and part-time people are actually working for us. And this kind of fee for service is one way that you can get that state money to do the work that we want to do to transform our economy. And indeed, if you want to do it locally, our local director will, SBDC center director, will talk to your local directors and say, this is what we're doing, and she's offered to do that because she's a great ally and one of us. So she will help other people start these things up if you are interested in doing it in your area. I think I added something that was relevant, right, Tobin? Our study groups we've already mentioned, and I'll go into a little bit what we do in the study group is, one, we do political education. We all want people to be on board what it means with what white supremacy means, what heteropatriarchy means, what settler colonialism means, what capitalism and particularly finance capitalism, but all sorts of capitalism mean, and what the alternatives to those things are and how they can look. So we have study groups where we have this material and we discuss those. Then we're developing the study groups so that people also learn about how to engage, how to be a member of our organization, how to do meetings, how to do consent and consensus processes, and how to do good form meetings so that people learn these skills that are necessary to govern a civil society, how we can create and empower people by teaching them how to take power. And that's what we do in all of these other things. We do that internally too. This is what we do in Worker Owned Academy. This is what we do with the Resilience Hub work. This is what we do with the community health workers. We also do that for ourselves, very specifically, with the study groups being the catalyst of how we develop our group's cohesion, both political and organizational. I'm going to show you a little bit about, if I can share my screen here and present this. So there's a few different ways you can look at managing your organization. This is 3 examples that I'll do run real quick for you now. And you'll probably guess which one we end up with, since someone already mentioned it in the chat. This is the representative democracy. Here's a direct democracy, and this is what was called a sociocrat, the sociocracy. And these are different, and I'll go through and explain why and how. A representative democracy, this is taken from our work around Humboldt co-op academy, cooperative academy. And that's why this is where the board of directors and members and elections and stuff, it's for cooperatives specifically, but this is the same basic principles that go for a non-profit too. Here's usually what we see in a corporation or a non-profit. The board of directors, the members might elect the board of directors if you're going to be democratic. They employ a chief executive officer or an ED and an executive director, who then do the different managers, and then, you know, managers down to the workers in the bottom. It's a structured hierarchically top down. There's ways that you can make this less top down. For instance, rotation of board of directors. You can do these as more autonomous little groups that work more on their own rather than top down, and few things like that. Now, this is the opposite of this, which is the horizontal structure. You have a workers' collective where everybody comes together, or a whatever you want to call that collective, the center where everybody comes into and make decisions that are relevant for everyone. And then from there, you have these semi-autonomous roles or people that they are speaking about. They get to do the work they're doing on their own autonomously, unless it's something that is relevant for everybody. That's why they're semi-autonomous rather than totally autonomous. And you have that worker collective, and all the members would be in that worker collective, or everybody would be on a board of directors, whatever it is. There's a small group. Size will matter how you structure yourself. Now, how can we structure a larger group in this more horizontal way? Because this would not work with, you know, 15, 20, 30 people plus. Then you're like really hard to do this really horizontal structure. So how can you do that? That's where you start combining these two. You take it up and you make these horizontal working groups or circles. Instead of that vertical top-down structure, and we call this in sociocracy, it's called circles. These working groups, and they are semi-autonomous, just like that individual would be. And inside that circle, you can have a nested circle, like the operation circles, then have the shift circles, and all the shift workers can be also semi-autonomous inside each circle, depending on how you run it. So basically, you diversify all your decision making out to where it's most likely that where it has the most impact. So, and that way you can have a bigger organization that still have a more horizontal structure, and more where people can still have more input on what's relevant for them. Usually, in a sociocracy, as you can see. It has nested circles. Each circle then have an aim and a domain, which means they need to know what they want to do. What do they want to? Where do they want to go? What's their aim? What's their direction? And a domain, what can they decide on, so that they don't start fighting about things. And that are the budget circle, and it can be the hiring circle, and it can be the worker-owned Humboldt circle for us, like the cooperative development circle, or and so on. So in that map that you saw, and I'll talk us back so you can see it again. Oops, too far. Here, this is quite accurately how our circles are. Not every little project is in a circle on its own. Some projects end up being in a program area circle. But this is basically our organizational structure too that we use, because we use a sociocratic structure, or more or less. It's a bit manipulated and made to fit us. But and these, you can see everybody have roles that they are defined in a circle, and that is an individual responsibility that they have autonomy over making decisions over that their role. And some of those are linking roles where they're linking two circles together. They're usually one from each circle that goes to the other, like one from the board of directors that goes to operations, and one from operations that goes to the board of directors, so that there's one linking role either way. And they also usually make decisions by consent. So this is how you divide work, by roles and circles rather than work descriptions. This is how you make decisions, consent. This is the structure you use. That's a quick rundown on sociocracy. And I'm gonna hand over to Tobin to explain why we do.
Thank you, Morgan. So if your heads are exploding, that's okay. What we're trying to do here is to paint a picture overall of how much intentionality goes into organizational structure in everything that we've talked about, and how much time we need to put into developing the procedures and the culture of our organization. So if we don't do the incredible amount of work that Cooperation Humboldt has done to consider and develop these things, then we end up using whatever structures are most familiar to us. And even with the best intentions, what we have at our fingertips is the skill set that we have been given through our life experience. And our life experience is primarily one of white supremacist, capitalist, heteropatriarchal architecture. I really like to think about architecture and how the design of a space determines how that space is used. And even when it is a board of directors of beautiful, kind, and wonderful people, and a staff of beautiful, kind, and wonderful people, when we operate with the underlying assumptions and characteristics and power structures of that system, without questioning where it comes from, then we run into the constant emergence of these white supremacist, capitalist, and heteropatriarchal tendencies that are deeply ingrained in us. And incidentally, when we do consider these things, we still run into those same tendencies over and over and over again. And what the distributed leadership structure does is it begins to dismantle that architecture. It takes constant work, it takes constant nurturing, it takes constant redoing and redeveloping. We're at Cooperation Humboldt 4.0 now. And that means we have intentionally restructured our organization 4 times, but really it's every day. And I think maybe more importantly for this group and this time that we're spending together is that building our organizational structure and culture is a project of Cooperation Humboldt that permeates every project that we do and is independent. It's in the study groups, it's in worker-owned Humboldt, it's in the community health worker collaboratives, it's in the food team. Every program area being built on these principles and then operating from these principles is an educational empowerment and training process that we are committing ourselves to with energy and resources dedicated to that. And when we are mentoring each other and ourselves and empowering each other and ourselves to operate this way, it makes us considerably more effective as an organization, hearkening back to that question of how do you do this with 2 full-time and 5 part-time staff? And really the answer is by working with distributed leadership and shared power. When we talk about shared power, I think the big light bulb is there's more power. there's more power in sharing power. And if you put in the energy and the time to create those power structures, we become powerful. And I get so excited about that. And I just urge and encourage every group to it's so easy to get wrapped up in your projects and your programs and say, oh, we agree with these ideas and we're doing well enough. You know, it works fine. But really, there is something that needs to be dismantled over and over and over again to make space for something new. So that's why we do it. And having seen it grow and evolve over the past couple of years, it's just incredible and inspiring. Morgan, you have anything to add to that before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I did a study group less than a year and a half ago. A year ago, I joined, a little bit more than a year ago, I joined Tobin and David and kind of started a circle with Worker Owned Humboldt. They were mostly, that was like Tobin running a program on their own. And then we started a circle because I wanted to do that too. And then I joined Tobin at a few academies, and then we landed that SPDC thing in January. And since then, I've been working for Cooperation Humboldt. And you kind of like, we created the program so that we could get that extra person to do the time, so that we can create all these other people, like support all these other people to also create. And that's how most people who are working for us kind of got to start working for us. It's like we created these programs and we started getting funneling money in from, and we'll look at a few examples. The SPDC is one of them. And from there, we kind of grew into the organization that we're doing, but our focus was always help others do the work that we want to get done. In a sense, educate, empower, you know, that.
So with that, we are going to open up some breakout groups where you can ask questions and talk about what's on your mind from what we've done so far. I have shuffled our groups so that we get to meet and interact with new folks. And so I will do that now and see you there. We're going to meet for another 5 minutes. Here we go.
Sean, I want to bring, Sean, your question going out of that, I want to bring that into this big group. And Sean was asking, what if we have simultaneous areas of fascism and this more so solidarity economy areas? You know, that's a reality we need to face too. And that's why we band together. And that's why I'm saying we are thinking that cooperatively organized things, people who learn to work together and take everyone into account. If we need to protect ourselves, it's better to do it together than individually and trying to do it with like this liberal democracy that needs that strong state to protect you. That's why we're saying that's not a likely thing to happen on a small scale, because you're not going to have a strong state. So, but we're going into something completely different that it has to do with self-defense. And we don't actively work with that because we are movement builders. If someone want to come out to my farm and play martial arts, I'll bring you out and we can play, but that's not what Cooperation Humboldt does, you know?
Oh, so here we are. Welcome back. And we're going to talk now about yet another piece of the puzzle. And you've been hearing this. And I know a lot of folks in transition groups are working with community partners. We're going to talk about building relationships with Keystone in institutions and community partners, and why. Morgan talked briefly already about the concept of dual power. What we're really saying is, actually you can read it in the What We Believe section on our website. We are willing to work with you, even if you don't believe what we believe. So long as when we're doing that work, we don't sacrifice our own institutional values and priorities. So, I know from local interactions that some of the anarchist groups aren't happy with Cooperation Humboldt because we exhibit so many anarchist characteristics, except the one where we just took a $400,000 grant from the city, from the county. So our willingness to work with Keystone institutions and community partners is another way that we're building that dual power. And in particular, coming back to the notion of, that relationship that we established with Open Door Clinic, where we said, what can we do to fill in the gaps that you're experiencing? On the other end of the spectrum, if instead of working with large institutions, you're working with small community groups or even individuals, again, it comes back to that human-centered design process. If you're not yet familiar with human-centered design, I encourage you to look up the work that is being done at Think Place. And we were fortunate to be able to have some of our staff trained by Think Place in human-centered design. And that is really a process by which you go out to the community and you interview the community and you talk about the problems that the people are facing, and then you ask them to propose solutions, and then you build the capacity and the power to engage those solutions with those community members as leaders. So New Rising Hmong Association and Kuna are examples of communities stepping forward and saying, these are our problems and this is how we're going to solve them. And so from working with community colleges to the county government, to the cities, to the tribes, we build strong relationships, as strong as we can, with those entities in order to demonstrate how effective a network of communication can be and how supportive we can be of each other. And Morgan, I'm going to pass it over to you to talk about city governments and also fill in any gaps in terms of why we build power this way.
Yeah, two reasons, right? Very simple. We do more together. We are more effective. We have a greater impact if we work with other people. We do things that we fill in gaps so that we get known, so that we get resources, so that we can do the work that we feel is important to reach this ecosystem, to build that resilient ecosystem. We're not going to be the ecosystem. We're trying to be the midwives of that ecosystem, if you want. So the diversity of relationships is important because we are not going to be the ones who are the ecosystem. We are trying to build that. So Arcata, which is the second largest city in around Wigi, Humboldt Bay, and we have a couple of examples. The Kuna that Toby just mentioned, we got just awarded $400,000 to create this neighborhood that we talked about earlier, to create more programs for the Latinx in the northern Arcata neighborhoods, and so that's one way that Arcata has created that relationship with them. Beforehand, we built that relationship so that once they got money for the American Rescue Plan, they decided to put money towards us because we had built those relationships with the city already. They asked us about policing. They asked us about, because the person who's working with that, he's a Latinx guy himself. He is working with the community that they haven't had a good interface with, all of a sudden have an interface. And because there's an interface, now we are also going to get funded by the city doing that work. They also do similarly with our transitional housing village work, which is a tiny home village for homeless people, that they really want us to do that because we've started this work. We've been working on housing. We've been working, and and Tobin's just soon going to talk about more about in depth how we do some of that. So work with underhoused people, and then that means that we come in as like we have some solutions, we have some ideas, and those things then. Then they like, okay, so you have a good idea and you have a plan. We'll see if we can find some city land to put you in so you can build that homeless, because we have a problem with homeless people and we have a problem with low income housing. We don't have enough. So if you can supply it, we'll be happy to give it to you, because there's no one else doing that, you know, and they need it. So that I'll send over to Tobin for DHHS.
Oh my goodness. So one of the relationships that we have is with the city council member from the city of Eureka, who is also a core team member, meaning that she went through our study group and participates actively on our care and wellness team. And the DHHS, Department of Health and Human Services, came to her and said, we have $5 million and nobody has applied for a program. Would you please do something? And she came to us and said, let's apply for a program. So we put together a proposal for $32,000, and the DHHS came back and said, wait, we have $5 million. And they wanted to spend this money before it disappeared. And in order to make that possible, they actually changed the entire structure of the funding stream to make it accessible to a nonprofit organization without doing a competitive bidding process. And then they've been hand-holding us through the entire ordeal of actually getting the funds. And when we sat before the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors and they said, why aren't you giving these funds to an organization that has experience with street outreach? The director at DHHS said, because nobody else applied for it and they were willing to do the work to get it done. And so that is an example of these relationships of trust from the city council member and her relationship with the director at DHHS to us saying, we're listening to you and we recognize that you're going to give us just an extraordinary amount of paperwork to do, and we're willing to do it, and established a reciprocal relationship where they really want this program to succeed and are putting in a lot of time and energy to make it happen. And so from that, when it all pans out, the next time something comes up, the DHHS is going to think of us because we didn't back down from the daunting task of interfacing with the county. And you know, that's a big relationship with the county government that we're willing to put in the work. Morgan, you want to talk about the tribes?
I would love to. We've mentioned the tribes before. In Humboldt County, there is 5 tribes that 5 different tribes with different language groups who live within our county. At least 5, depending on how you count. We've worked with 3 of them. Some of them only have rancherias and so on, but we've talked about WIAT already, and I'm going to just mention how the Dishkoma Humboldt Land Trust Program is also a cooperative development program. What we're doing with them we're also doing with other tribes, with rancherias and with the Latinx and the Hmong community. We've created this business, what we call the Cooperative Business Equity Program, long name to say we're educating cooperative developers in communities that are embedded in the communities, that come from communities. And then we support them to create co-ops in their own communities in a culturally appropriate way that we can't do. I mean, I'm a Swede and Tobin is, you know, they're American white dude. And, you know, we don't necessarily know what's culturally appropriate for Latinx or culturally appropriate for the WIAT tribe or for the Hoopa tribe or for whomever. And so we work with these tribal members so that they can help in a way and do supportive services for those. And supportive services here is, for instance, these people are very traumatized. They might not have access to childcare. They might not have access to like pay their rent, and because they would have bad work situations, or not enough food sovereignty and food available to them. And those things are important if you're going to create the co-op. How are you going to do that when you're struggling with those things? How are you going to start a business that takes 6 to 18 months to get off the ground, and then you're going to get it profitable? It takes another few years. So we are working with that program to support them by, like, say, hey, if your auntie can babysit while you're doing your education to create your thing, we'll pay her through our program here that we got this grant money to do. So we're working that way to, like, support these low-income people to be able to create their own businesses. As one example of how we work with tribes and other communities embedded in them. And I think, Tobin, you already mentioned the Native American pathways and how they help New Rising Hmong, how we connected them. So I'm just gonna go back. And another part of that project is that we work with the community colleges. So we have a community college that is basically doing not like credited things, but community development and workforce development kind of stuff. And what that person, I mean, they do the accredited stuff too, and we do work with them to make hopefully build accredited cooperative business development or whatever, cooperative economics class. But what we want to do with the community colleges is also they put on the class where we teach the cooperative developers from these organizations. So we're working with them, and then that's the first step, and then they can develop that curriculum so that they can end up being an academic thing in the future. There's another way we work with Keystone partners to build these relationships so that we can get to where we want to go. So that when someone goes to our local community college and gets a degree or whatever in woodworking or construction, or even ambulance driving, or whatever they're getting, their medical education, nursing, whatever, their business training will hopefully in the future involve how to run a co-op, how to cooperate, how to learn from each other, how to work together, how to share your economy. That's the kind of goal we're having with building these resources and having a 10-year time frame, because that's what we think we have before we need to have this institutionalized locally to really work. So that explains, does that make sense? Building relationships. And I'm just going to hand over to you with the nonprofits and other community groups you work with, David.
So the whole reason that we're talking these through is to share about the diversity of interaction. And hearkening back to what Pat asked, what about all these disparate groups and how do you work together with them? So we reach out and we make connections. And some of the groups that we're working with, Morgan, I don't know, do you mind if I just do a summary because we're behind schedule a little bit? Yeah. So we work with an organization called Centro del Pueblo that has a Latinx Indigenous food sovereignty program. I love that story because I personally saw the opportunity to start to take over the community garden, the urban community garden. I jumped on it. Folks on other teams were like, we don't have the capacity to do that. They were probably right, but I couldn't let it go. And then Centro, because of an established relationship, came in and said, we want to partner with you on this. Ended up basically taking over the project with us as a liaison and support, and are doing so much of a better job than we ever could have. And so, this is about centering power among the groups and the individuals who are best and most capable of doing it. And so the work that is happening now in the garden far surpasses any little digging in the dirt that we would have done. we also work with the Unitarian Church. Why? Because they heard about what we're doing and they like the work that we're doing and it matches with their values. A lot of times you're going to see, oh, these values match with ours. This is a better expression of business than capitalist business for indigenous communities. It's a better expression of business for Latinx communities and Hmong communities because cooperation is inherent in those cultural structures. So it matches with the values of the Unitarian Universalist Church or whatever congregation it's called. We work in collaboration with our food co-op because they're a co-op. A great interaction with the food co-op where our composting co-op said, can we work with you? And we tried to make a pitch and they stopped us in the middle of our pitch and said, you don't need to pitch to us. You're a co-op. That's it. We're a co-op. You're a co-op. It's a thing. And so cooperation among co-ops and many, many, many more where you just call them up and you say, hey, we're doing this. What can we do together? And that outreach builds these relationships. And we learn by generative conflict and struggle for clarity as we move forward with each of these groups. And the last one is
coincidentally, Marissa just posted a question about this very thing. We also work with social impact investors. And this is one big thing. We are trying to also develop local investing, ways to locally invest into this ecosystem, like having local exchanges and things like that, or public banks and all those things are we are working on those other investing things. But one thing I just want to mention right now is that we also have a very good relationship with a social impact investor group called Full Spectrum Capital, where they are coming in particularly with the Dishkama work, but also others work potentially to really bring in the full spectrum of investment from philanthropy, from really rich people to loans from really rich people. And the whole spectrum of that means that there's 0% loans or 90% loans, which means you can pay us back 90% of what we give you. We just don't want to give you everything, but if you pay me back 90%, I'm happy. Or it's a 1% loan or a 5% loan. It's a whole spectrum of money that comes in. And David could probably talk a lot longer on that because that's what he's working with mostly. Not mostly, he's also our ED, but he's the one who works most with it. So that's just what I want to say. We also bring in the dough. And that is how we got, that's how we got all these other relationships. You went from, David told me once that the social impact investors told him, you're going to go from being a radical nut to be a visionary if you bring in $200,000 to your community. And so we bring in $200,000 to the community. We are visionaries, and that's where we're at right now. That's why you're hearing us being all we're doing all these things because we brought in a little bit of money and we have a vision, even if we're radical nuts too. So that's my social impact segment. Should we go on to co-ops and social change?
Well, we
should do action
at
points.
Time. Yeah, we're at time. So
I'll just do two sentences on the Dishkama Innovation Center. So our idea is that we're going to build a center to do all this work through the Dishkama, where we're applying for a huge federal fund for several $1 million, where we're getting low-income tax credits to build low-income housing on top, where we're getting impact investors to put money into so that we can have a physical center developing all this going forward some 2-3 years out. So that's what we've been working to now, to be able to do this a cooperative development center. Cooperative development centers exist all over the nation. They usually work with farmers and that kind of co-ops, but they do all sorts of co-ops. We want this to be a cooperative development center which focuses and holds straight in mind our ideals, not just someone who's creating co-ops for farmers to sell their stuff a little bit better, but to keep that idea of the ecosystem in mind, to keep that where we want to go, where we think we need to go. That's what we want our center to be specifically and not like everyone else. That's my 10 sentences. Sorry, not 2.
So thank you all so much for spending this time with us. Again, we want to come back to the invitation to reach out to us via email. I'm going to put my email here in the chat, and something is happening that's making me confused and lose my chat. Oh,
sorry. I put the emails on here, and you can put them in the chat too if you want to. We'll also send our emails out afterwards in the little package that we're putting together with resources for you. Whatever, even if that's just links, we'll add your emails there. And this is what we think you should do going out of here. I'll just read down the list, but educate yourself as a cooperative developer. That's cooperationworks.com, for instance. I have a great education for it to become an educator. Start an SPDC co-op program, as we said, with your local SPDC. Establish relationships with your local tribes. Establish relationships with your local groups doing similar work. Do you want to do the rest, or should I keep going, Tobin?
Oh.
So start producing educational materials and opportunities to educate for that liberation, for that autonomy. Plan towards working at an ecosystem level and have that goal and vision clearly in mind to avoid the mission drift of doing the doing rather than doing it because you want that ecosystem built. You have that goal and vision, and keep that clearly in mind so you don't get lost in doing street outreach. Why are you doing street outreach? And then empower those semi-autonomous distributed leadership so that you can get more done because more people are actively doing it with that sense of direction. So that's our kind of action items for you going out after here.
And we're at time. I want to close by saying, in my heart of hearts, I think the reason that Cooperation Humboldt is continuously being as effective and expansive as it is because of the educational program, in particular, being able to really recognize that we are in a capitalist, white supremacist, heteropatriarchal, extractive system that lives within us and the institutions that we live within and create. And to dismantle those intentionally through all the different types and styles of structures, or any that you create on your own, as the foundation of the work, opens the doorway to an entirely different universe of capacity. It is truly incredible to see how breaking apart things that are so familiar and precious to us make space for something entirely different and new. Yeah.
So that's us.
Peace out.
Thank you all.
Thank you for your time. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. I feel like we'd have a standing ovation if folks weren't sitting at a screen.
Thanks very
The
much.
crowd is going nuts.
Thank you so much.